Hello, and welcome to the third episode of Design Systems Rodeo. This is a podcast that focuses on the more advanced topics of design systems, and I'm your host, Kevin Muldoon. I'm a senior design technologist with Dow Jones. I'm a writer, I'm a designer, a programmer, and I also created the Genome Color Palette tool, which was for WCAG accessibility for your color palettes. So today's rodeo topic is Culture Club. And this is focusing on company culture as a dynamic of the success of design systems. And today we have Ben Callahan as our guest. And he has such a deep knowledge of this. And as a matter of fact, he wrote a wonderful article about culture and how that affects uh, the adoption of design systems and how successful that design system is. So he has exactly the sort of perspective that I think we're going to really enjoy. Uh, for those who don't know Ben, he's the founder of Sparkbox. It's a web design and development studio, and it specializes in design systems. And not only that, but well, actually, that's Ben. But first, let's do the roundup. There's so many different interesting things that happen. The first thing I should say is Gina Ann, who, if everyone should know Gina Ann, if you use the word design token, she made that word. And she's also the organizer and founder of Clarity Design Systems Conference. So congratulations goes out to Gina because she's starting a new position as principal product designer at Microsoft. And so congratulations, Gina. Very cool stuff. So the second thing is that yesterday Figma did a broadcast called Framework, talking about some new features that have come out. And just very briefly, uh, Figma variables are now expanded to be able to handle typography. There's also a new features for Code Connect. There's a new tool for dev mode that brings production ready code snippets. And just very, very quickly, it's just so much. I can't even really talk about it because I need to dive into it. Um, and But it's so much change in such a small amount of time. Um, One thing I would mention is that well, we say that there's variables for typography. They're really not. Rather, the typography styles will still persist, but now that you can actually put now you can actually put information into the variables where your typography styles can inherit from. So it's not exactly what I was imagining it to be, but it's still pretty interesting and very cool. So, with all of that said, let's start with our guest, Ben Callahan. Now, uh, he's a great influencer of design systems, and as I said before, he's a writer and he's a speaker, and he also has a background in software engineering as well as design, and he consults with a wide variety of companies. And one of the great things is that he builds a community of design system aficionados and enthusiasts. And right now, the only reason I've known Ben's name is because he does a weekly poll and then follows that up with an open forum, and it's called The Question. And it's very fun and it's wonderful stuff. And Ben also has even bigger community projects coming on, which we should hear more about. But without any further ado, everyone, please welcome Ben Callahan to Design System Rodeo.
Hello, everybody. Good to see you. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, thank you so much for joining. This is exciting.
Yeah, it's an honor to be here. I appreciate you reaching out and appreciate the invitation.
Absolutely. We were chatting just the other day about um, the role of culture within design systems, and you said something pretty fascinating. I thought, which is those people that the culture is not conducive to having a successful design system is exactly the organization that absolutely needs that design system.
Yeah. Yeah. And on an implementation side, the organizations that need them most are the ones that actually are probably the least able to build them, right? I mean, that's that's like it's just a hard part, sort of like an odd thing that I think organizations have to deal with, which is when you need this more systematic approach, that's oftentimes because you don't have it happening organically, right?
Mhm.
So yeah, that creates some interesting challenges for sure.
Absolutely. And I was just reading your 2023 article about this, and I wanted to know, well, would maybe unpack a little bit about what that article is, but maybe talk about what prompted you to even write the article. It's very
Mm.
detailed.
Yeah, it's a hard story to tell, So my company Sparkbox does a lot of consulting work and implementation work with systems, and we had an engagement at the end of a year, 2 years ago, I think now, and um, we were really excited about the work. We worked for probably 6 to 10 months with this company. We were doing a bunch of sort of product design, kind of like MVP type effort. But also they wanted us to build a system because they had a lot of ideas for new products, and so they thought this could be a good opportunity to put a system into place to sort of like rapidly iterate on new ideas. So we love that idea. We like the product design. We love product development. That kind of work is stuff that we really enjoy doing. And of course, we got a lot of systems folks here, so it was a good fit for us. And we got in, we started doing a bunch of work with them, and struggled, honestly, to get things to really take root. And so what ended up happening is at the end of that year, we actually chose to walk away from that work. And the reason that we gave to that company was cultural incompatibility. And we did this kind of at the end of the year, at the end of our first or second engagement with them. And it just didn't sit well with me, right? Like in the same way that we were just talking about how organizations that most need systems are the ones that are maybe least able to build them. Organizations that most need help, like consulting help, are the ones that are really struggling. And so for me, as an owner, as a founder of Sparkbox, I looked at this and it felt like a big failure to me. And I think we used those words, cultural incompatibility, without enough context. Like I didn't fully understand it and I needed to unpack it more. So I dove in to just being able to better understand organizational culture. And that led me down rabbit holes, of just research and learning. And that's sort of what kind of initiated a lot of this.
Well, and this wasn't your first engagement. It was your second engagement.
Yeah, we start with an onboarding. So we had a short onboarding engagement. Usually those are about a month for us.
I
And
see.
that's more discovery, and then kind of jump into iteration. So,
And I'm wondering, did you have any sense on that first engagement that maybe this wasn't going to be as smooth?
mm, yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's hard, because we want to be able to serve clients of all different shapes and sizes. That's something we've been intentional about from the beginning. And I want us to work with a diverse set of people. And so we try really hard to sort of accommodate different perspectives, different approaches to the work. And of course, our team early on was like, ooh, this is a different culture than we've worked in before. But we didn't have a process in place to sort of truly assess a culture and understand. We didn't have that understanding yet to sort of figure out how that applies to the approach that we take. And that's really kind of the connection that I've been trying to make, which is
Right.
understanding a culture, assessing and really analyzing and understanding, but then also synthesizing that data into an approach that will work with them, right? And that's where I feel like the real value is. It's easy to look back and say, here's why it didn't work. I
Mhm.
want this kind of research to help us create better approaches in moving forward, so we don't have to look back and wonder why it didn't work.
Sure.
So that's what I've been focused on.
And you had that experience, and you said, okay, it's a cultural incompatibility. It's not you, it's me, or whatever. It's something.
Yeah.
And then it didn't really sit well with you, and you kind of like went through this discovery process. And I'm wondering, what did you learn about what the heck is culture?
Yeah.
And what is it? When does it become incompatible?
Yeah, man, this is like the heart of it. I honestly, whenever I talk about this subject, one of the things I think is really healthy to do is actually to define culture first, because if we've got a bunch of people attending here, we've got a bunch of people that will listen to this, and when we use that word, everybody's thinking about different things.
Hmm.
And so the way that so I read a bunch of articles and papers from the last 20 or 30 years on this, on organizational culture. And the one that I really identified with was this model by Edgar Sheen, who was a professor and that kind of thing, and I think he worked at Harvard at one point. But he kind of identified this sort of pyramid of, like, you know three sort of primary concerns when we talk about culture. And the top was this idea of artifacts. So that's like the stuff that's very visible to you, stuff that you can kind of observe without necessarily even participating. So a free lunch, just all the benefits that you get, the easy stuff, right? The ping pong table, all of that kind of thing.
Hmm.
The second layer down, he talked about sort of like what people say. So when you talk to folks after you've maybe been involved for a little while at an organization, you start having conversations, you're building relationships. The things that people say about the culture are actually really important. And so that's your mission, your vision, your values, the statements you close your emails with, the slogan on the wall, all of that kind of stuff, right?
Yes.
And then the bottom layer is this idea of basic underlying assumptions. So this is what people actually believe, and this
Mm.
is really hard to get at. What I've seen, at least in my work, is that most of the time you only really get an understanding of this when things are hard.
Mm.
And what we're looking for in a healthy culture is alignment between these things, right? The
Right.
things that we see and the things that we say align with the things that we believe. So that's, in my mind, kind of a good picture of culture.
And I the one thing that really stuck out there is that when it's hard,
Yeah.
that is really the point where you know whether or not that is the culture,
Yeah.
or it's the culture that you simply project out there because it sounds nice.
Yeah. And I think it's funny, you as an employee, you experience these things kind of from the top down, right? You
Mhm.
sort of observe, you hear, you talk to people. And it's only when things are hard that you get to see, are my leaders, are my peers making decisions that actually sort of put their money where their mouth is, right? Do the things that they're deciding align with all those other things? But when you're in an organization and you want to create a good culture, you can't do that. You don't start at the top, right? Buying a ping pong table doesn't fix anything. So what we have to do is, like, find alignment in that low level, the things that people believe. And that's really, I think, we at Sparkbox have tried to do that by hiring for values. So if we can be very expressive about the things that we believe, about why we do what we do,
Mhm.
my hope is that that attracts potential employees or even potential customers, that sort of have that shared understanding of why we're doing what we're doing. Then the rest of this stuff falls into place. It's much easier for us to work well together when we have that kind of alignment.
Absolutely. And there's so many different questions, but I wonder if we could focus on, because you had a relationship with the company that there was a cultural just non-alignment, and it troubled you. And I'm wondering where, how would you describe the difference of their culture, that company's culture, and
Yeah.
your culture, and where was it that you couldn't actually get together on?
Yeah. This is like the heart of it. Another framework that I discovered is called the competing values framework. And this
Mm.
is like a way of sort of looking at an organization's culture on these sort of on this four quadrants, an X and a Y axis.
Okay.
And it's a really interesting perspective because it allows you to kind of evaluate those axes, and that helps you sort of understand how much of an organization's culture is weighted in these four different quadrants. Um, and so when I look at sort of what happened, with that specific instance for us, I think I know about Sparkbox and my organization that we're very collaborative. That's this top left of the four quadrants in the competing values framework. And it's a a joining of flexibility and an inward focus.
Hmm.
And it's like this idea that we actually believe we need each other in order to make really good work. And so that's kind of like the root of that quadrant of the culture. But I think the organization we were working with was in the bottom right, which is like this competitive, sort of externally focused and very controlled culture.
Yeah.
And so those two are diagonally opposite each other. And in this framework, those are, it's the diagonals where there's real struggle. And if you think about the idea of competitive versus collaborative, those two are actually kind of, they don't actually work well together, right? Like if I'm competitive, I'm looking outside the organization, I'm basing decisions on my competitors, on the industry, things that are outside of the org. If I'm collaborative, I'm looking internally, I'm thinking about my peers, my coworkers. And so there's just it's almost like oil and water, so that's sort of, I think, if I were trying to assess what happened, that's kind of
Right.
how I would do so.
Right. That's amazing. That's and I'm wondering about my culture, or the culture that I find. I mean, certainly I've been in organizations, or been around organizations where I did not feel particularly comfortable,
Yeah.
or I didn't feel like I was aligning with what they aligned with.
Yeah.
I didn't value what they were valuing.
Yeah.
Is probably that. And I'm wondering where, specifically with design systems, where do you find that alignment, that on that quadrant that you were mentioning,
Hmm.
where does it just work beautifully?
Yeah. Well, of course, if you're operating in the same quadrant as another part of the org, things work well, right?
Hmm.
What's interesting about culture too is that it's not as black and white as just there's a culture,
Right.
especially in larger organizations where you have many teams, where you have silos, where you have different levels
You have
of people.
subcultures within
That's right.
that big culture. Yes.
Precisely. Yeah. And basically any place where humans are getting together with any regularity, there's a subculture being formed. So that means there are likely thousands of subcultures inside even a mid-sized organization. So
Right.
a design system is unique, right? It's a part of the organization that has to serve all of those product teams, right?
Hmm.
And that means there's sort of necessary collaboration, necessary interaction between that systems team and almost every other part of the product org.
Hmm.
So there's a ton of interaction like that. And each of those product teams could have their own subculture. And
Right.
so the the way I'm trying to apply this in our consulting work is I actually think that a systems team needs the ability to kind of move between these quadrants. And I think systems tend to be, at least from my research on this, it seems like most of the systems teams are kind of somewhere between this kind of collaborative or hierarchy culture. And those are on the left side of that quadrant diagram. And
Right.
that's because systems are internally focused for the most part, right? This is not 100%, but
Right.
and that means what we want to do is think about how the processes, right, that the definitions of how humans interact in and around the system, those are flexible and they can sort of slide along a spectrum from collaborative to a little bit more controlling.
Mm.
Um, I think when I started this work, I was stuck on this word control. Personally, I'm a really collaborative guy, but I think the word control was almost like a bad word for me. And so what I've had to learn is that there's really healthy versions of more controlling systems. There's also unhealthy versions, right? But there's also healthy versions of collaborative and very unhealthy versions of collaboration, right?
Mm.
So I think it's shifted my perspective to say what we really need is health, and there's a spectrum of health within which we can operate, and that allows us to work with any part of the org
Right.
in very productive ways.
Right, right. Yeah, and that's it, you could almost umbrella that with "it depends." I mean, you can imbalance on any part of that quadrant,
Yes.
and come up with a not satisfactory result. Um, and and of course, it's collaboration. You definitely are going to have to do that, but it's a special sort where you're going to have to go outside of your silo, and
Mhm.
then outside of another silo. And then because in an ideal world, in my ideal world of a design system, where we are breaking down the silos and coming together with at the very least a common language.
Yeah.
Uh, and I'm wondering, where can you think of an example where it just something about the cultures, just some strange combination, just didn't make things work
Mm,
for, let's say, a design system, because I think our listeners
yeah.
are design system peeps. So,
Honestly, one thing I'm seeing, of course, and I'm sure all of you have experienced this, but it's not it's not the first time that most organizations are trying to do systems. Like
right.
we've been trying to do this for a while now, for years now, and almost every one of our clients has tried in some way to build a design system, and most of the time they've failed, and that's why they're reaching out to us.
Yeah.
We've worked with some people who are in their fifth and sixth attempt.
Yes.
They understand there's value, but they just haven't been able to crack it yet. So what's interesting is anytime I talk about this and sort of like lay this out visually for people to see, it's amazing how they can look back at all the attempts they've had in the past and point exactly to what happened on that cultural chart. So it's really good as a tool to sort of look back and assess what failed.
Right.
And so literally, I've only spoken with maybe a handful of folks who have ever said to me, the reason our system failed is because some technical thing happened. We couldn't figure out how to write the code. Or some, design thing happened. We couldn't solve the problem with design. That's not the challenge. The challenge is between the interactions between the people. And
Yes.
so this stuff is actually way more important, in my mind, than actually building the components or pieces and parts of a system.
I totally
Yeah.
agree, and my experience with design systems is more individual contributor, right?
Mm.
And I will help out. I'll consult, but when I go into an organization, what the first thing I'm going to see is the wreckage of at least 2 to 3, if not more, design systems.
Oh yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like going down this road and just seeing cars all littered about. It's like, oh, you poor. I hope I don't end up like that. I hope my system doesn't do that.
Yeah.
But it's real. It's a real risk.
Yeah, one of the first things that we do is actually pull the Band-Aid off on all that old stuff, because there's so much to learn from understanding the history of systems inside of an org. You can start to understand who has fought for these things in the past. Of course, understanding what were the things that led to their demise, right? We want to make
Yes,
sure we're not repeating the mistakes of our past.
right.
Um, Understanding who were the folks who were really funding this, and who were the people trying to put it into practice, right? So these are all the important things we have to understand, and understanding what the drivers were, and how we're addressing the needs we thought we had without the system now.
Right.
So there's a lot to learn, and it really becomes the foundation of how you approach the system moving forward, in my mind.
Absolutely. And by the way, we have guests, and please feel free
Mm,
to ask questions. We've got about 4 minutes or so left. Um, but while we keep an eye out for any questions that come, I wonder if I can ask you if when did you become interested in design systems?
mm.
When did that spark, as it
Yeah.
were?
What's funny is everybody that I talk to, so I've done at this point hundreds of interviews with folks like yourself, Kevin, who are design system practitioners, design system leads. And one common thread I keep finding is that those of us who are in systems now, if we look back at our history, we've always kind of been in systems.
Yes.
And so I think back to just even like some of the very first little local websites that I was building for just little businesses around where I lived. And I was always trying to find ways to sort of reuse pieces and parts to make things more systematic. And so I think it's just an interest for me that has been, I don't know why, but it's just sort of like inside of me. And I
Mhm.
think that's probably true for a lot of folks. I would say it's been 7 or 8 maybe even a little bit more years since we at Sparkbox built our first sort of more official, pattern library with some guidance and some process and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so we've been doing it for as long as it's been sort of a word the industry's used. But before that, we were trying to be systematic in every approach. So, yeah.
Yeah, I know. I feel exactly the same way. It's like it's just systems within systems, and it seems like designers. Of course, my first love was design.
Yeah.
Is that the designers that I gravitated towards were building systems.
Mm.
They didn't even touch the graphic design until they actually had a system that they could hang their design off of.
Yeah, I love that. And you're right. There's such a rich history with typography and editorial layout. There are so many really cool systems that exist in that space that have been in this world of design for decades before we were even thinking about this stuff. So
Yeah,
it's really good history to look back on.
it really is, and it's almost any interest you might have, whether it's programming, design, what have you. It's that peeking behind the curtain, and you see
Yeah.
that, and to me, that's what a design system is, and by gosh, thank goodness that we're opinionated, because that makes it really fun.
Yeah, it does. I'm interested too in looking at other spaces. I've been reading a lot about architecture lately, city planning. Like
Yes,
you can when you go into Paris, it feels like Paris.
yes,
Like how did they do that, right? And if you
right.
dig into that, you'll learn there are architects that were very specific about the angle of roofs and the height of buildings and the visibility of the river and all kinds of things that sort of like create that is a system that actually creates that feeling, of that city. So I think
Uh,
there's a lot for us to learn from.
yeah, this is not a good look. Hey, that's the back of my head. Check this
Yeah.
out. But
Oh yeah.
yeah, you're familiar with this one.
Oh
Yes,
yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
This
So
is
good.
this is fascinating. It also has a correlation with object-oriented programming, as well as you know the history of this one, as well as agile. Agile.
Yeah.
This is very influential. A guy named Christopher Alexander. So definitely, if
Yeah.
you're listening, pick up this book, and certainly, uh, yeah, it's astounding. And its patterns is really what we're talking about. Design patterns,
Yep. Yep.
pattern languages. So, well, gosh, I guess we did a really good job here, Ben, because nobody had a question. We answered it all before anyone even wrote.
How about that?
Good job, man.
Yeah.
Well, listen, thank you so much for your time. Oh, by the way, before we go, you have a new community coming up, don't you?
I do. I am so excited, man. I think there's like another thing I've learned, of course, is that these organizations trying to do systems work aren't always supporting those teams the way they maybe need to be supported. And so it definitely feels to me like there's a little bit of a gap there. And at least for the next, year or two, I think there's a need for us to try and really be more intentional about supporting each other. So there are some good resources out there already. The question which you mentioned earlier, Kevin, is like it's like sort of a nice organically forming community of folks who are just learners. We're just trying to learn from each other. So that's been really fun. And that effort, we're almost on our 20th episode of that now, but that effort's got me thinking a lot about how we can be even more intentional. So we're looking at forming something called Redwoods, which is going to be a much more engaging, sort of more consistent opportunity to sort of really learn from and challenge each other in the systems space. So I'm really excited about that.
Redwoods.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we should put a link there so everybody can sign up and get involved with that.
Yeah, that would be wonderful.
Yeah. Listen, thank you, Ben. And this is the third episode of Design System Rodeo. This is all about culture and how important it is to find that alignment. And